Good morning. Okay. Today's April 9th, 2019. This is regular city council meeting. We're going to start with the workshop. It is 12:06 now. It's agenda item 1, pre-council workshop. So we're going to start 1-1, update from the City of Moab Sustainability Director. Thank you, Rosemary.
You're welcome. So yikes. Sorry, let's do that. So I did post the draft of our plan. It's about 90% complete. We're just working on some appendices right now and cleaning up some of the diagrams and figures in it. But the good news is it's been vetted by a lot of people. It's been vetted by about 60 people now. So scientists, the NREL engineers looked at it, my colleagues up in Park City and Salt Lake, and it's been posted up on the website. And so we're getting a lot of community feedback too. And hard copies have been upstairs and in Moonflower and in the library and at the radio station. So really positive feedback. I got some really interesting feedback from the 500 women scientists of Southeast Utah, and so that was really good. And so part of it was they were actually looking at a lot of the strategies. And so today I'm really sort of a big picture, what's in it and what I think is our priorities. And then the feedback from you is about the goals and about the timeline. And just to put in context, because I think a lot of people still think of my job as this environmental job. And so I just, in the plan, you'll see that there's not just environmental goals, there's social goals and economic goals. And so I just wanted to put it in this larger context about sustainability is really the spot between all those three elements. And the other thing is about systems thinking. And so I had a brief conversation with Dave yesterday about how there's so many things on this list, and I know you guys have a lot of priorities and projects, but I think it's really important, given my bandwidth and resources, that we really strategize over this next year and really think of things that are going to move the needle. And so the idea about systems thinking is there's an appendices in the report that looks at every single strategy from different angles. So like an environmental angle, economic angle, an equity angle. And I think that's what we really need to think about. Because that's the whole idea of this discipline of sustainability. So like systems thinking, I mean, if I was looking at a parking lot, I don't look at it like Chuck does. I look at it as stormwater retention, heat island effect. Is it bicycles versus cars? And so that's the way I think we need to start thinking of a lot of these projects. And then the other part of it is empowerment. And so, I've been doing a lot of work with the businesses. This year I want to switch gears and work with residents more, but the idea of just giving people the resources, whether it's information or, devices and light bulbs, whatever it is, about empowering the people within the community to take this forward. And the other elements are these two schools of thought right now in the sustainability world. And so there's the adaptation and mitigation. And so in the past, everybody's like, oh, how do we lessen our impact? It was all about mitigation. And now people are starting to say, oh, well, climate change is already happening, so how do we adapt? And how do we look at all these things that are related to climate change and come up with this, sweet spot of how we manage it and govern? And so if you look at some of these things like housing, it's like, how do we have affordable housing and at the same time make it energy efficient? Or how do we think, people don't think far out of climate change, they're already saying extreme heat. So extreme heat, how are we gonna lose tourists? And I know a lot of people would like to lose tourists, but the bottom line is then we lose sales tax. So it's like, how do we think of all these elements of sustainability and what we can do here within the community? So when I was working on the plan and working on my projects, this is sort of the, the big picture of how I was looking at things. So the first thing was the reality. So one of the realities, and I've talked about this once before, is, we set goals in 2008 of like 20% reductions. We're up like 34%. So the reality is we're not moving in the right direction, and so we really have to step up our game. The other thing about the reality was looking at the inventory. So I have the preliminary community inventory, and there were a few surprises. Like transportation was a lot higher than I thought it would be. So part of the reality is, okay, if transportation is responsible for a lot of our emissions, then maybe we should spend more time on those kind of projects or those kind of policies. And plus, for transportation in a bike community, I mean, it's a win-win. And so that's some of the sort of baseline data that had to go into the report. There's now 136 strategies. So we have 10 goals that I'll talk about, but within each goal, there's about 10 strategies. Some have a little more because there's more of an impact. So like energy has I think 12 or so. So the whole idea is looking at these strategies, prioritizing what we can do, what's possible, and then the right order of them. And then the other part is integrating it with other departments. So Chuck and I, started to work on some things, like the diagonal parking. I was doing a talk about biking, and so we got the diagonal parking in and that connection. When Nora gets here, it'd be great to work closer with her in terms of planning, because a lot of stuff has to do with buildings that's in the plan right now. And then the last part is funding and resourcing all these projects. So far, most of my projects, I would say 95% of my projects have been funded externally. I think you know about all those projects up there, except for maybe the Clean Air Grant. So the Clean Air Grant was something we got a couple months ago. We'll have an application out next month, and it's for businesses or residents or the organization to buy electric equipment. So like electric blowers, electric lawnmowers, and so we'll be giving out a rebate to citizens. The other thing that took a lot of time, and I'm still working on it, is the data for the report. So I have the community inventory, I'm working on the municipality inventory, but these inventories, the ICLEI protocol is 167 pages of how to do the inventory. So you have to really do your inventory precisely, otherwise you can't compare with other cities. That's what, so the inventory took a long time. The other thing was, these applications that we're doing, like Tree City and bike-friendly communities, they require a lot of data gathering and a lot of data input too. And so that's what takes so much time to, do these plans. One thing I noticed when I went through all the existing goals is we had different years for like when we're going to achieve things. So I tried to make it a little more consistent. So 2032 is sort of our target year for most of the goals. The other thing about the sustainability plan is I really want to think about how we can start to think about job creation. So this, like the big golf course solar, it's like, how do we get more local people interested in it? I've had a couple conversations with Rocky Mountain Power over the past couple weeks. I met with Andrew, our solar, a solar contractor in town. So it's like, how do we capture new job opportunities for people in town? And then at the same time, think about risk. And, if it's something about stormwater management, it's like, how do we create a job about that? Or how do we start connecting with the schools, especially like the solar? Like, it'd be a great thing for the high school and USU to be involved with this. The other thing besides the plan is the support from city leadership and then city council. And so this was a study that, pretty recent study of like 300 municipalities and businesses, and they said, what, for the cities and the plans that worked, what were the elements? And so one of them was this leadership support. Another thing was clear goals and metrics. And so I've mentioned it. So I went through the 3 existing goals, and then I've added 7 more goals. So these first 3 goals should be familiar. So it's our energy efficiency goal, our carbon goal, and our water goal. The only thing that's new is on the water goal. Our water goal was all about water quantity, and I think we should add something about water quality. And then even though I just said it'd be nice to have like 1 year, 2032, that's consistent across the board, I think Ronnie brought up that Park City has moved to 2030. Some other cities have moved to 2030 after the new climate research came out. So that's something to ponder, whether we want to move that up. And then these are all the new goals. So, you know, I went through, there's an appendix in the plan that it's all the general plan things. So we're not starting new. I went through all the old reports, all the old, you know, resolutions and ordinances. A lot of them didn't have numerical goals. So it might have said, you know, we're going to reduce waste, but it didn't say by how much, by when. And so the new goals have all these metrics in that we can start tracking. This way, you know, if you have a 20% goal by 2024, each year you go, okay, well, this is what we need. We need 3% this year or 2% this year. This way you don't get to like 2019, like we're in, and go, oh, we're so far away from our 2020 goals. And so all those new metrics are in there. I put one in about active transportation, biking, and then alternative fuels. So alternative fuels too, not just EVs, but thinking about natural gas, thinking about biodiesel, education engagement, always my favorite one. The scientists also said that, you know, when they looked at the report, they said, we'd like to see education in every single one of the goals, which I think is key. Funding and purchasing, this is something I've been working with the Travel Council about thinking about purchasing some things en masse for like hotels and also businesses. So if things are more expensive, like, you know, environmentally preferable products are more expensive, if we could negate that by buying things in bulk. So that's the funding and purchasing. Biodiversity, tree canopy and soil, those are all new ones. So the thing about, I think biodiversity is pretty self-explanatory. Tree canopy is looking at we had a forestry plan, but they weren't native trees and they weren't drought-tolerant trees. So it's looking at that again and coming up with a more sustainable tree canopy guidelines. The soil one, I'm really excited about. At the risk of sounding like a nerd, we could be the first city, I think, in America to have a soil goal. And soil is really important. It's a natural resource. It's totally overlooked. It has a lot of benefits in terms of, you know, stormwater and even wildfires. So it's something I think would be great to add. And then the other ones are health, well-being, and as you go through the plan, like underneath will say, you know, this is how many people could afford housing. So the metrics might be how many kids are on free and reduced lunch. So these are sort of the broad goals, and then underneath are all the metrics that'll help us see how we're doing. And then the last one is local food goal. So the report right now is probably about 60 pages. So I would just, not that you guys don't read everything you get, but if you didn't have time to read everything, there's an appendix in it called Appendix E, and it talks about co-benefits. So it takes all the goals, it takes the 136 strategies, and it has these nice little emojis about it. So if you take, you know, that first one is all about different kind of housing certifications. So it's like, okay, this has a good return on investment. There's equity in terms of our citizens. It has a good environmental. There's health benefits, and then it's pretty effective, cost effective. And so when you go through the priorities, that's a quick and easy way to look at it. Is Mike still here? There's a specific one for Mike. It's a Gantt chart. It's about 12 pages. That has all the data too. That's B. That's for you, Mike. So the one about the
I'm sorry, can you just go back?
Yep.
Just real quick, just to be able to look at this real quick.
So yeah, so in that one, like, so I just picked some ones that had, pretty good comprehensive, benefits in each category. But like the plastic bag ban was on there. And in that one, you'll see, okay, it didn't have as many like effectiveness. And so that's what I mean by like really trying to concentrate. And I know like that was an important thing to do, but in the grand scheme of things, it's like, let's start with strategies that we know are going to be more impactful.
I was just curious, like, how did you come up with the list of co-benefits?
The list of what?
Co-benefits. So like, how did I decide something has a health benefit or?
Well, more just like costs, equity, environmental, health, effectiveness.
So for costs, it's easy. It's like, what's your return on investment? So costs, you go, okay, that's gonna, we're gonna invest this much. There might be, whatever, Rocky Mountain Power rebates, and it's a return of investment like 3 years.
I just mean like the labels themselves. Like I get why they would be chosen, but I just didn't know if there was if there was a.
No, it was subjective. It was like professional judgment. But that's something that I got a lot of feedback on too, which was nice.
About about the having more co-benefits than just social, environmental, and economic. But I think it's good too, because you're including wellness and effectiveness.
But yeah, I mean, when you go through it too, if people, if you guys go, oh, I think, this one is maybe not ranked as high, that when the scientists looked at it, I think, they compiled it and averaged it out. And so, and I have some other people looking at it too. So NREL is looking at it, and I'm waiting for some modeling from them, and they're giving me feedback on the co-benefits too. So, yeah, it's amazing. Sometimes, like, when you think of a project, when the stimulus money came out, all the cities got the stimulus money. And I remember this project I was really surprised about. New York City got money, and they used their money to whitewash all their roofs, because they had these tar roofs. And it was just white paint. A lot of people went to work, and it had a great ROI.
Yeah.
And it had a great equity because these people were in apartments with no air conditioning. And so sometimes it's surprising on what kind of projects actually, if you're looking at, again, like from a systems perspective, make more sense. So I know you guys have been interested in the Living Building Challenge, and we've discussed it a little bit. What I was trying to do with one of the appendices is come up with a checklist. So I was picking out criteria from all these different certifications, and what I'm proposing is we have this checklist, and when Nora gets here, I could sit down with Nora, but we can go through and maybe incentivize people that are building and have a certain amount of the elements that are on these checklists. And then maybe a developer wouldn't have to certify it, but they'd get a benefit and we'd get a benefit in terms of like, because otherwise we can build affordable homes, but if they get in there and their, heating bill is $300, it's only affordable for, a month or two. And so we really need to think about reframing how we build buildings and when people do remodels, and then even going through some of the, houses that are here and helping people do things like insulating their houses and wrapping their piping. And so that's one thing that's going to come up again and again in different categories in the plan. I know when the RFP went out for Walnut, Tracy, gave me a copy and I went through it, and we had this discussion about cost, and there was just a study that came out about people's perception about the cost and how much the cost really is. And so there seems to be a big gap, and so we really need to start to think about how we educate and do some training with our developers. The Water Board's starting to do trainers with irrigation folks in town. And so I think, that would be a great investment for the city to do.
Can I ask a question? So I'm really interested in the Living Building Challenge, and I don't know where we are as a group. We had the gentleman here give us a presentation, and then he recommended that we talk to Alicia in Seattle. Is that, because this is happening every day. The buildings are going up, and so are we going to be proactive about this, or are we going to wait? I'm curious where we stand with that, and your input.
I love the Living Building Challenge, but it's pretty similar to well, and so in this checklist that's in appendices, it has, here's living building, they call them imperatives. Then LEED, has a different classification, and then well calls them, optimizations, and then green enterprise, that's kind of the cheapest. If you wanted people to get certified, that sort of has a lot of the same elements, but it's cheaper. Living building is the most expensive. So my suggestion is we come up with some kind of a incentive program for developers that are going to do this, or I don't think it should be mandatory at this point.
So, well, and green enterprise, is it just net zero? Is it net positive? That's what was most exciting to me about the Living Building Challenge, was that we're in a desert climate, and we don't have time to waste, in my opinion.
So LEED has categories, on the green to gold and the badges. So LEED has categories, and it says, so it's like a 40% reduction, a 60% reduction, 80% reduction, or net zero. And so LEED, it gives you a whole range. Well looks just at occupants' health. And it looks more at occupants' health. And so it'll look at a building, and so LEED will say, oh, you should have low VOC paint. Living Building Challenge will say, get paint that's on the whatever red list. It's low VOC paint. LEED is the same thing. And so they're all sort of, trying to get at building better and having healthier members of your community. But it's, when you...
There's two different things, sorry to interrupt, but so there's the Living Community Challenge, which is what we were really talking to them about, and that's actually why I was asking you about the co-benefits, because each petal is like a co-benefit in Living Community Challenge world. But then with respect to just whether it's LEED or Living Building or well or Energy Star, whatever rating system, whatever qualities that we want to take from that and then turn that into policy. There's no way that we could pass a policy to say all future buildings could be Living Building Challenge. That would be a ridiculous thing. But we could say, like you're saying, there are certain imperatives like water and energy that we could look at and incentivize through policy. But there are two different things. It's like the idea of our built environment and the what we can do when somebody pulls a permit to have control or an effect over those priorities. But then also just on the bigger picture too, the Living Community Challenge would be a way to incorporate those cost benefits or co-benefits or imperatives as well.
Because what I've seen,
but I'm really excited about your excitement about
it. No, but I feel like we're in this moratorium. There was this energy to try to make positive changes for our community, and I don't know where we're at, and I am a little concerned about the product that we're going to get out of Landmark Design. I don't think that was part of their mission or their our set of goals for them. And so, as to make the policies, what can we do now, I mean, do we wait for Nora to come on? I mean, I'm just like, I feel like I'm just getting very nervous about time-wise. And are we gonna set an example as a city? Like, are we gonna try to do this for one of these criterion for the, who was it, the Public Works Department for our city building, the things that we're trying to create as, you know, as a municipality, are we going forward?
That's a really good question for the council too, just kind of where our temperature is on it.
My reading of the Walnut Lane RFP was that we were trying to move in that direction there. Did I misread that, or?
No, we asked them for their expertise in all four of those credentialing systems.
But I'm with Karen. I mean, I would be interested in figuring out what overall we could adopt as some guiding principles moving forward. Yeah.
Or even some
commit
pilots.
to more of this. Yeah.
You know, like if we go forward with that Public Works building, that would be a great pilot for, you know, a LEED Gold. And some communities like Boulder set like net zero for a certain square footage. So if you're building a house or you're building a business over a certain square footage, then the onus is on you. So that's another way we could do it. We could say, okay, we don't want to affect affordable housing, but for a hotel, that might be a criteria for a hotel. We might have another criteria for residential homes.
So the way I view it is that I'm still very interested in the Living Community Challenge. I think it's a decades-long framework that we'd be buying into. I think that even buying into it, we still need the sort of granularity that we have in this plan to even get to those goals. So I don't think it's one or the other. In terms of the time frame, this plan is almost done, so I think that's really great, and it provides a framework for work to happen immediately, which is what's important. It's like that we don't spend all our time on frameworks. It's like we set the priorities and everyone goes for it. I think that the lodging issue that we're addressing in the moratorium, because of the time constraint, it has to be limited. I personally didn't envision it addressing environmental sustainability. I thought it was more addressing the equity piece, if you will. And I also don't think it's the end of the dialogue that we as a community need to have about lodging and more broadly tourism. We want to have a discrete deliverable at the end of it in terms of some land use code stuff changes, but we, like many communities around the world, are struggling with the limits of tourism and its impact on our ability to function as a complete community. And so I think hopefully the moratorium and the work that happens there will set the stage for future dialogue. When are you going to cut this off?
When
When we're done?
halfway through,
Okay.
like 12:30-ish.
Okay.
But we started a little late, so.
Right. So I just have one procedural request. And that is that we be clear when we leave this how we're going to comment as a council. Like, is it going to get posted as a document in the Google Drive that we comment on collectively, which I like to see other people's comments as opposed to them being individual emails, but just so that we know going forward.
I like the Google Doc idea too.
Is that the point we're at?
Yeah, I have like 2 more slides.
No, I mean in terms of your process.
Yeah, I think it's pretty close. We're just trying to, the appendices are so cumbersome. I'm trying to get them into a better format for people to look at. But like I said, I think if you guys just really concentrate on E, or that there's a Gantt chart too, but that basically it just goes through this timeline of like 2-year periods. So like I mean, I was kidding around, but I think Mike will find that the most helpful. But I think everyone else probably, if you just go through Appendix E, that'll get us there. in terms
I
of
think
comments.
you're just feeling our excitement to get there, so thank you so much. Yeah, keep going, let's finish.
Yeah, so I only have like 2 more slides. So one of the things I talked about engagement is that I really like to start to work more with residents this year. And so it's going to be in the context of a community challenge. And so we're going to go out and do some work more with the residents, especially in terms of water conservation. And then I have a list of priorities. Like, this isn't a perfect world what I'd like to do in 1 year. And these I have that I'll hand out because I know it's kind of hard to see up there. But those are related to the budget that I gave David. And so I wanted to put some cost numbers near some of these projects so you have an idea of, you know, well, you might like that project, but not for that price. And so, and then some of them, you know, like solar bellies, it's the high end, but we could just buy a couple and try it. And so that's something that'd be great to get feedback on too. And then these are like the have-to projects. And so I have been working with Rocky Mountain Power a lot lately because they have a little slightly different timeline than I do. And so I'm trying to inspire them to get on my timeline. And then we're also putting another array in at the water reclamation plant. And so, yeah, so the next steps are just feedback. I'm going to give maybe 2 more days to clean up some of the edits that I got, and then I'll repost it. And so, again, if you guys could look at the goals, the timeline, co-benefits, and I'll send out this slide presentation too. I mean, I'll post it up on that shared drive. And then we could come back. I was thinking we'd come back with the finalized plan in May.
Can I just ask one little side question? How should I think of air quality in terms of all this? I mean, I did come across the mention of working with the state and the reference to the park, and I think, I can't remember if it was the, but anyway, does it fit more into the well-being item? Is that kind of how I should think of it fitting in?
Yeah, there's, I think, 1 or 2 under active transportation too.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think that's where they're all at. Some of them are hard because they went into more than one.
Yeah.
Like biodiversity like dark skies could have went into biodiversity or energy efficiency, but we put in biodiversity. So if there's something that you can find that you're like, well, where did that get missed? Just send me an email and I'll let you know where it is. I know it by heart almost.
Yeah, I don't think that's turned on, and I don't think anyone wants to get anywhere near you, but if you push the button.
Does it work? Hello?
No, try again. Rachel, I don't know if the microphone is on, the single mic is on in the amplification station. Sorry.
I need to take the time.
It's okay.
So real.
It's just because of the Facebookers, the YouTubers.
I'm okay if you stand here, Mike.
I mean, it is your mic for the next 24 hours. Yeah.
Watching scatter, yeah. So I just recently learned there's a outdoor burning ban that's been on the books for a while, and it's just now being enforced by Mona, as I understand it. So, for example, there's 2 separate issues. It's not only an outdoor. For example, I have a bunch of brush that I typically have been burning every spring, and I have a wood burning fireplace. It's an EPA-approved stove because it's got a little afterburner in it, kind of thing. So, from a sustainability carbon footprint point of view, are we better off to? So now what I have to do is I have to haul all the brush, put it in a truck, haul it to the landfill, multiple trips rather than burning it. But then on the other hand, the neighbors don't have to put up with the smoke and so on. And there's a health aspect to it. But my question for you is, from as I say, a carbon footprint point of view, is it a wise thing to enforce this burn ban or not?
I think it's a great idea to enforce the ban, but depending on your species of trees, the best thing to do is bring it to Public Works and mulch it. They have a mulcher where they mulch trees, and then that mulch is free for residents, and then that water And so, yeah, burning it, I mean, especially outside. I mean, I feel a little better of you burning it in your wood stove because you're at least getting heat, but burning it outside is,
I'm a bad boy.
Well,
Is that, wait,
you're
is
a
that
city
a,
council member.
is
so-
that an option?
what?
To bring
in the
your
county? You're,
No, to bring your, like, your branches and everything to the public works. I mean, are they gonna freak out that residents are coming now with all their yard waste?
It's
No,
been a,
it's a certain size limit, though. They could only take it to a certain,
yeah, it's a service that's been available.
Really?
Well, and so that's just kind of when you showed your slide about systems thinking in the beginning. It's like, all right, well, if we want to tackle air quality and we want to have biodiversity in our soils and we want to have water retention because, because of the soils and mitigate the flooding impact and propose green infrastructure, like all of those systems come together. And so then we can get organized around the collection and then redistribution of biomass like that. And then we have systems in place like our contract with Monument Waste that where we could, or the relationship with the solid waste district, or, there's systems in place in Moab that could be utilized too from a systems thinking perspective to help a guy like Mike get rid of his yard waste without having to burn it, because we all have leaves in the fall. And
Okay, well, thank you for the suggestion, that's great. But how about wood burning fireplaces, particularly if they're EPA approved? I mean, I'm not, because I'm heating up the house, I'm not running my furnace.
I think it depends on the time of year, too. If it's in the winter and there's inversions, I totally understand the health department saying, I actually have asked them to, restrict when people can burn, because it's much better not to be burning I have neighbors out in the county that burn plastic, and I mean, it's really dangerous.
Painted wood. Yeah, I've seen it all.
Yeah, painted wood, all kinds of toxics.
We burned a pickle barrel once on a camping trip on the Green River. Never again, okay. I mean, talk about toxic, yeah, but that's another story. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So the draft 2 in the shared drive, it jumps straight to Appendix G, it appears. Do we have Appendix E somewhere?
We have all the appendix. She's just trying to get them in like a 8x11.
No, but by we, do we mean this council?
I think Kaylin's just looking for the right link for us to comment on. Yeah.
I could put them all up in order. I have them in one file that they're all in order A through K, so that might be the easiest.
Okay, so I'm not missing it.
You're not missing it.
Okay.
okay, Rosemary, thank you so much for the presentation, and lots for us to think about and give the feedback on. And then will there, how are we going to do an email with the document? Is that, because back to what Kaylin was saying, is that what you understand?
Email a link to a document that'll also be in the shared drive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Doesn't want an individual email.
Because then we don't see what.
No, it's a link to that's what I meant by email the document.
Yep.
That would live in the shared drive, where just like our agenda summary comment form like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes
That's
sense.
great.
And if parts have to be PDFs, we can comment on those too. It's not as full featured, but just as a way to move it along if you're struggling with translating something to a Google Doc.
Okay. What she's doing is taking screenshots of it now, so we can reduce it.
Okay.
Can't you just print it?
But that'll be a PDF.
Just print it to a PDF and,
Yeah.
Don't rasterize the fonts, please.
Thanks, Rosemary. Well, then we're going to move on to 1.2, the 5-year capital improvement program briefing with Chuck. Thanks again, Rosemary. We're so excited to be talking about this.
Yeah.
Are you excited about a 5-year capital improvement?
We are thrilled. We are thrilled.
I'm glad to hear that.
I do actually think that the two presentations dovetail, don't you?
Yeah.
Oh. Oh, cool. Thanks, Karen, for giving that to me.
So one of the things that David has asked me to do since I first got here was start putting together a capital improvement plan. I think there have been informal ones in the past, but I've not been able to find council-adopted ones. There's a lot of benefits if we can get to that point for the council to adopt a 5-year CIP or capital improvement plan. One is a lot of the external agencies will look at projects and say, oh, is it on your 5-year CIP? The CDBG grant we just recently got, they asked if it was on our plan, and we were able to convince them we had budgeted for it. So that was good. It's not as restrictive, I guess I would say, too, if you were not familiar with the budgeting, as our annual budget. It basically forms a framework that says we've evaluated our needs at this snapshot in time from a project standpoint, a monetary standpoint, and these are the projects that we think we need moving forward over a 5-year time frame. It can be I'm used to having them reevaluated every year, and I was talking to Mike, that was one of his questions was, you know, what if we don't have the revenue, or what if we don't have, something comes up? I've seen bridges fail. Heaven forbid that happens to us, it doesn't happen to us. But if a bridge were to fail, for example, we might say, whoops, we got to take care of that bridge now, even though it wasn't on the 5-year capital improvement plan. And so into something else that was on there might sit for a year, get pushed a year back. I just wanted to kind of frame that as what this is, where it can go. What we did as engineering staff is we've worked with department heads to develop their proposed 5-year plan. So I sat down with pretty much everyone except the police department, because they do their own thing, and talked out what the projects they felt they needed over the next 5 years that weren't maintenance. Now, you could probably argue that some of these projects are heavy maintenance, or they're renovations. It's not necessarily all new facilities, but we tried to keep out painting of the walls out of this kind of a project, right? There was some dollar thresholds, but also functional thresholds. Okay. We evaluated the various master plans, like the solid waste master plan, the sanitary master plan, the water master plan, for priority projects. We also utilized existing cost estimates for the projects that have been designed, like 100 South. We have a pretty tight cost estimate for that project, as an example. And we used our engineering judgment to estimate future project costs. And I talked about that with the department heads too, and what they thought the costs might be for their improvements. And then we compiled them into a proposed 5-year CIP. There are some reasons, and I'd like to point out some of the analysis. I know you've all had a chance to look at that very busy spreadsheet that I sent that shows all 5 years broken out by fiscal year, starting this fiscal year we're in now and moving out forward. The overview you've seen, I have that, or we can blow it up closer if we need to look at that. But there's 33 projects on this. 8 of those projects are tackled in 2 different fiscal years. I think that was one of the council comments question. I don't know if it's you, Kaylin, or somebody, or why do we have them on multiple years? Might not have been. But one of the things is on the big projects, we might do design in 1 fiscal year, which can take 9 months to a year for a big project. And then the next year, we actually go to construction. So that's why I've combined them in terms of there's 33 projects, but if you were to count those up, you'd come up with 41. $46,718,000 programmed over the 5 fiscal years is the bottom line on that. Project cost by fund, because we budget by funds. And I rated these from lowest to highest. So as an example, CIB, I included that even though that's money that's external funding. It's included as part of that total $500,000. Sanitary sewer, $2,238,000. The hotspot funding, the reason I have the hotspot funding in there is the discussion is that with UDOT, as recent as this morning, they want to let us administer the parking structure funds. So in other words, they want to do a pass-through fund. There'll be an agreement that'll come to council, and it'll say things like, you're going to have this many parking stalls and get it done in 3 years or whatever the time frame is. Those are the kind of parameters we've been talking about now. But since it would come to us and we would secure consultants, secure contractors, pay them, it would have to go through our budgeting process, right? It's not like UDOT's doing it for us. So that's why it shows up as a funding source. Potential external funding, so that 46 million doesn't seem quite so intimidating. The county recreation service district, 75,000, beyond what they do for a regular maintenance funding. CIB, 500,000. Department of Water Resources, 3 million, and that's for the water storage tank out on Spanish Valley. We think we can get that funding secured. The hotspot funding I just explained. So a total of 11,000, call it $600,000, which is 25% of the total proposed 5-year CIP. So of that 46 million, 25% of it essentially is external funds. And that leaves a balance of 35 million from city funds over the 5-year time frame versus the 46 million.
Or we get fund shopping.
Oh, yes. One thing I have learned in my time in Utah is there's a lot of money available in the state to go after, much more than in other places.
Can you go back a slide? Just only because I was curious. So those are like listed, those are like projects.
Those are funding sources for projects. So as an example, that CIB 500,000 on the, if I may answer your question, I think. That is fiscal year
Yep.
1920.
Yep.
$500,000 to
Okay.
go towards the Stewart Canyon drainage improvements that are part of the UDOT widening. That's what that 500,000 CIP is, how that would relate to that.
Okay.
Did I cover that?
Yeah, yes. Sorry, you had such a great slideshow too. And
Oh, no. It's a lot of information, there's no doubt. And because and David could tell me how many different, or Rachel, how many different funds we have, but are there over 20, 15?
Not funds per se, but I would say, I mean, for instance, with like Mark, MRAC, Parks, those are all sort of sub areas within
Right.
the capital fund budget, you know?
Okay.
So you can just think of them as sort of project costs by almost like subject matter or area.
yeah, because then a hotspot's like UDOT and
Right.
Yeah.
mix. I don't know what mix is.
Mix is an example. One is, you'll see there's money on there for a public works building.
Okay.
And for that public works building, since it houses roads and water and sanitary sewer and parks, that could be a mix. I'm not saying this is the percentage, but you could spend 25% out of those 4 funds alone to fund that. And that's why, and a lot of that is, and mix shows up on that 5-year plan, but in other places where I had detailed breakouts, like the 100 South, I showed them.
Okay.
So this is where we were at. Potential bonding projects. And this was me just taking a shot at projects that some of them David and I talked about, because as a budget officer, he knows the budget in much more detail than anyone else. That we thought this would be the right years for these. The other thing that, generally speaking, was if it was over $1 million, I thought we could consider bonding. But you'll see in 1920, there's 600,000 there, and that's from the Stormwater Fund, because Stormwater Fund will be low after the Stewart Canyon payment to UDOT. Total bonding potential, and I said potential because those aren't, those are decisions for others, us all to make, or you to make, finally, ultimately, but as looking at them as potential projects that were large enough to maybe justify bonding, $22 million, which is 47% of the 5-year CIP total. or 63% of the city-funded portion of the 5-year CIP. And I think what stands out in that is that we would consider bonding projects because they're larger projects, because we don't generate enough revenue in any given year to pay for that project. Much as we just did for 100 West. You know, we bonded for the sewer portion of 100 West, or a significant amount of it, because we didn't have enough money to just pay for that project and do the other things we needed to do with the sewer funds. So I thought this was also of interest. The largest projects, which are greater than 2 million total. So if any specific project was greater than 2 million, for purposes after looking at our project list, I'm calling that a largest project, or a large project. $2 million for Stewart Canyon, and that's pretty much we're committed to participating with UDOT for those improvements as part of the 191 widening.
But for that, we're only paying 1.5, correct?
We're going to pay, we're hoping to get a 1.5 out of our stormwater funds, and then $500,000 from CIB.
Right.
But we don't, and it's high on the CIB list. I think the mayor and David got that done the other week, but we don't have that cash yet. We're hoping to get it next fiscal year.
Still have to apply, actually.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, we're hopeful though, being a number 3 priority.
Yeah, it was 2 or 3.
Yeah.
I think it was 3.
From our collective, like, local list, but that still competes with.
County too, right? And
Well, that includes the county,
okay.
that number 3 included the county, like the special service districts and
okay.
et cetera. But that still has to go through the formal CIB process.
Yeah. But I think we have a solid chance for that money. $2 million for Public Works building construction. The Public Works building, as you know, has outlived its useful life. And that number is not a Taj Mahal building. I can tell you that. It's just it's a functional building. But, you know, so that's an estimate. We don't have design, so I'm not here to say, oh yeah, the architect's estimate is 2.1 million. It's I feel good we could get something functional for that amount of money. That would be much better than what we have now. It'd be safer and functional.
Is the 250,000 included in that number for design?
No, it's not.
I hate to ask a dummy question, but is the Public Works building basically like for office facility?
It's offices to check in and do their work, and we have a admin assistant there. But it also has a shop. It's storage for all of our equipment, all of our.
So does that include all of the other stuff? I know there's the building.
Yeah.
And then there's all the other stuff.
Yes.
So that includes all the other stuff and the building?
Yes, like I said, at a functional level.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
City Center renovation, that's $2 million. That's the estimate. Basically, that's to bring this building, remodel it to the plans that were developed 2 or 3 years ago, I think, David. 100 South and 100 East, we have 100% design plans for those, so that cost estimate looks a little different. There's not a lot of zeros at the end because that's the exact engineer's estimate for that project, $2.3 million. $3 million for the storage tank on Spanish Valley Drive, of which we would hope to get hopefully all of that as a combination grant and loan from Department of Water Resources Drinking Water Group. $5 million for the Center Street Gym replacement and renovation. Now, you know, this was precipitated by the sewer failure at the gym, a more intense discussion between David and Joel and Chase and I. That building was built in 1961. It had a period of its life when it was dormant, apparently, and then it was reoccupied. And we certainly have not done a detailed structural analysis or anything, but there are stories of windows falling out during basketball games, and there's it really needs to be evaluated to see if it's better to renovate that facility or consider a new facility. At least we're putting it out there, you know, if we want to have a gym, that building needs to have some attention to it, at least analyze to see how long it's going to live and how long maybe it could be renovated. I put in renovation, the $5 million is basically replacement cost. To change that and upgrade it a little bit, 2 basketball courts maybe instead of 1.
David, didn't we last year, spend a couple $100,000 in new lights and changing out?
We did replace, what's that? We did replace the lights and resurface the floor, which is like an every 5-year type thing. The lights was a little more of an investment, but I thought it was more like, it wasn't that much. I mean, I want to say maybe, it was like that much for all the buildings we did at that time. But I think the city gym's portion was a fraction of that. So, but we can find that out easily. Yeah. In fact, I can track that down. So we've been putting some money into the gym, but it's been very superficial. You know, it has major structural issues with the roof.
Yeah, we're not sure that, someone said put solar panels up there, and I'm like, not until we evaluate the roof to see if it could even hold them.
And then the energy audit, that has not taken place on that building yet, correct?
That is, I believe that's correct, yes. They're coming down this spring, right?
Was
The
that
retro
the one?
The
commissioning.
HVAC, like, I mean, the whole, that system is.
I think they just completed the work.
Okay,
But
for
it's,
the gym.
we
They're
don't
coming
have
down
the
to the
results.
MRAC, that's right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's kind of just been happening. It's not done yet. The results of it.
Chuck, if I may ask, what exactly happened? What was the sewer failure? I asked at the Center Street Gym, I asked because it sounds, on the face of it, pretty draconian, frankly, to me, to suggest we ought to build a whole damn building over again. It was just a sewer failure. So what exactly happened?
Yeah, and it wasn't just over the sewer failure, but the sewer failure potentially would have been a $150,000 fix, so it made us just start questioning, you know, what's happening. What happened was the sewer blocked about 70 feet from the building. It's old, 60-year-old transite pipe that we think is...
Is that like the Orangeburg?
It's asbestos concrete.
Okay.
It's about...
Worse.
Yeah, in terms of when it fails, it fails. It was blocked. We think that we're going to do some, in fact, glad you brought it up. The plan is that we're going to do some potholing on between Sun Court and the gym in the next few weeks when we get it scheduled in to see if we can identify the area that was clogged, because we're only able to get the camera. You know, we have various cameras, the sewer department does, through sections of that line. It goes like 700 feet behind the county building and down to 100 north.
It's still blocked. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but we think that we can get it unblocked. So we're gonna we need to pothole it to see if repairs could be as simple as replacing 40 feet of line for $10,000 or whatever it might be, versus, oh no, now this repair really should be
It's pretty common, Chuck, in old pipes like that to have them fracture or something like that, and the tree roots grow into them and...
tree roots, or, you know, honestly, part of the thing, and we've talked with the recreation folks about it, is they have these big events. And during the big events, it's the only bathrooms around, you know, like possibly registration for the race. People use it and flush things maybe they shouldn't be flushing, or just the volume of things that get flushed during those old pipes. But Obi went out there and he could find that where it's settled. You get sediment in those pipes, which is a sign that the pipe doesn't have a slope anymore. You know, it's collapsed. So yeah, no, we're certainly not saying replace the gym because of that sewer failure. We're saying maybe we should put it on a 5-year plan, and it's out there, I think, in the last year, for us to be keeping that in our mind, that maybe that's something that, I mean, you're the decision makers, but it seems like recreation's important to this community, and if that gym is important, really, I think we're gonna, honestly, from my technical standpoint, we're gonna have to put some significant money in it or replace it in 5 to 10 years.
I think it'll come down to whether we have the money or not. We'll it'll just have to compete with everybody else, whatever our revenue is at the time. I mean, so
Yeah.
that's my guess.
So in terms of how important it is, I'm wondering if doing a recreation master plan might be useful, just to put it in context and to prioritize our investments. It seems like I'm under the impression that some of the programs there kind of pay for themselves on an annual cash basis, but now that we're looking at like a big ticket replacement, evaluating that critically and how that fits into the whole community's recreation needs and how they get paid for and prioritized.
Yeah.
And then funding sources for, projects like this. Who would be that person to source that?
What do you mean?
Like, I mean, if there's recreation opportunities and grants and whatnot, I mean, is that the city managers? I mean, like,
Currently, it's the assistant city manager that would do the plan that you're talking about, Kaylin, and then
but I mean, because we're looking for outside funds for any of these
really,
projects,
I mean,
like, would that ever be an option for a
Who would chase
gym?
the money and the staff?
Yeah.
Yeah, various ones of us go for different grants,
I mean, Rachel would obviously be probably taking a lead role in identifying finance options and fund sources, but that requires a lot of consultation with subject area experts like like Chuck, or if there's someone we could talk to about recreation's specific fund sources, it might make sense. Maybe it's about approaching the rec district and seeing if that's something that they'd be interested in thinking through with us, or CIB would be a fun source for this kind of project too.
Okay.
we can get money from the Recreation Special Service District.
We can ask for sure.
We have historically.
Yeah, I mean they struggle because they're funded by mineral lease money, and they don't have a lease. It's kind of a year-to-year deal, and they struggle to really be able to plan for longer-term commitments of funds because of the volatile nature of the mineral lease money coming in.
So that's the special recreation district comes from the mineral gas and stuff. So that was the rec center.
The MRAC, yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And the arena.
Oh yeah.
Okay. $7 million for the parking structure, which is the pass-through money from UDOT. And then I've talked with Tracy about the design, relocation, and construction numbers, and kind of interestingly, he and I had come up with similar numbers, very close, separately. 7,750,000. I will name it differently, Kaylin, when I know what it's called. So we just call it the Walnut Lane Trailer Park, but yes. So just to identify the site. And so the total is 31 million, or 66% of the 5-year CIP total. And in some regards, I wanted to make the point with this that of all those slides that I showed you, looking at different ways of looking at the CIP, to me, in some regards, this is the most significant because 66% of the CIP are large projects. And that's because there's large need, right? You got a stormwater project that's been hanging around since the Depression. People have been talking about doing things in Stewart Canyon and trying to do things. Public Works building that's 60 years old. This city center, I don't know how old this building is.
It was renovated 12 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, but the building itself is...
Oh, it's way older than that, yeah.
Built in the 1920s.
1920s, so we're trying to keep it alive. 100 South is a stormwater infrastructure, put green infrastructure elements into that. Pretty big project because it takes care of, just like 100 West where we had sewer and water and roads. The storage tank, we need that water storage tank to enhance our fire capability. Right now we're not as good as we'd want to be. Center Street Gym, good discussion if we don't need to replace it, but for sure if we're going to keep it, we have to renovate it. Parking structure, it'll provide a needed parking for the community that's grown, right? And then the trailer park's a big project, but we need that affordable housing. So my point of just that those big projects comprise 2/3 of the CIP, I think tells us something, you know. It's not little tiny wish lists. These are big needs that we're suggesting we want to address.
Can I ask a quick question?
Uh-huh.
The check dams, I know
Yes.
it's complicated because of the property ownership, but is that anywhere in here?
No, and doing
Okay.
anything with those check dams isn't realistic. The Stewart Canyon will put in a large debris basin at the base of where the Stewart Canyon comes over the rim.
Mm-hmm.
It'll collect there, drop out the debris, the boulders, the sediment. The water will then come out, be piped down along the highway, and then down into the wetlands.
Mm-hmm.
That's the design solution right now from UDOT. It's just too difficult to get to those little check dams up on top. Those one you mean?
Oh, the hundreds of them, yeah,
Yeah,
that were done back by the CCC.
yeah.
The CCC era.
Yeah.
So that's not on there, okay.
No, yeah, and it would not only be the ownership, it would be the environmental clearances to get to do that, as well as how would we do it. We've looked at it and talked to some of the folks.
Mm-hmm.
You'd be almost walk in with mules to clean some of those basins. Some you can't drive to.
What do you have against mules?
There's wild burros all across the West that we could use.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, they kick.
And they
And-
kick.
I think, yeah, so those are the slides. I mean, I have these other slides broken down by year. If you wanted to talk about specifics, I could explain those project specifics. Yes.
Oh, no.
Yeah, or answer any questions you have now. I know we only have time, but
Well, and we're at like 1:12 right now, so, I mean, we did technically notice this to be an hour, and I don't know how people are gonna get hangry at you. Are you guys okay with 5 minutes of questions? Does that seem reasonable? Okay. I have no questions.
okay.
But I am grateful to have an actual plan, because I feel like just like you said, the city has needed to get organized on big projects and prioritize and understand where the funding can come. And then if there's a project on this list with the resources of the council and staff, we can hope to fund them outside of, general fund.
If I may, real quick, I was going to address your question about 100 South. Why did it get pushed out a year? Because of the 100 West project, which turns into 100 South, two reasons we pushed it out a year. One, we kind of feel like the people on this side of town on 100 West and 100 South have been through a lot with the 100 West construction for the 6 months. So we thought we'd give them a break for a year. The other is, and I think it's probably more important, is that we prioritize the Cane Creek heavy maintenance next year, which would go from Main Street all the way up to essentially the road yard or 500 West, because that road is falling apart, the concrete's falling apart, and the sidewalks, curb and gutter, a lot of that, and the drainage is bad. But because right now the current UDOT 191 construction schedule is fall of this year, they're going to go out to bid by August 31st. Construction would start, and it's going to be, in my opinion, in conversations with UDOT, at least a year of construction. I don't know if it's 10 months, I don't know if it's 14 months, weather may influence that. But 500 West to Cane Creek and out will be valuable as a locals bypass, even more so than now. So the thinking was, if we can get Cane Creek done or really close to being done by the time UDOT starts, then that road would be available for locals to bypass at least a significant part of the construction later on. So that's why we did it, but that's all could be managed differently.
Any other questions? Mike, did you want to ask anything further? All right. Well,
So,
sorry.
how does the level of bonding or other financing contemplated in this 5-year plan possibly impact the ability of the city to do more financing down the road? Because this is not the end of our maintenance and improvement projects.
Yeah. You're exactly right. And I think that working with Rachel and bond counsel, you know, we haven't done a detailed analysis on all of this. I know when we did the bonds for this fiscal year, we researched all of the city's commitments, and Rachel has that. Maybe you want to answer it more completely.
Sorry, I just had to get my mic on. One of the things that we talked about in some of those budget meetings is just the prioritization of all of the projects that Chuck's brought before you for the 5-year plan, because some of those will be competing for the same funding sources. And so until we have like a prioritization, we don't want to secure funding for project A if it's falling at number 6 or 7, and then once we've tied up our debt capacity for that project, that limits what we can do over the next 3 to 4 years as far as taking on new debt without new revenue sources. So the prioritization piece is going to be the key piece for me as finance director to say, okay, now we know what our top 5 projects are. Now I know which areas I can look for financing that won't be basically stealing finance from another project that may not be as high of a priority. That kind of answer. Yeah. I am in the process, though, of determining what our total debt capacity is for sales tax revenue, since that is our main revenue stream outside of enterprise fund. And my gut guess is that we're approaching it probably pretty rapidly with the new debt that we've taken on. But once I get that number, I'll share that with the council, and then we'll know how much we can bond over the next 2 to 3 years with our sales tax.
And it is true that bonding is limited because we do not charge a property tax, correct?
That is true. We cannot apply for or receive general obligation bonds because we do not levy a property tax.
No. And the further implication too is that we don't have a property tax like every other city in this country to be able to pay for these infrastructure expenses.
If I may, it's also worth noting that the rates you get from lenders for general obligation bonds or property tax backed bonds are the lowest you can get. So we actually pay more in interest because we only back them from revenue bonds, from sales tax bonds.
I think this council is probably going to need to see, in light of all of this, need to see an analysis of property tax, of implementing a property tax.
Is there a minimum or a maximum? Like, well, I guess a minimum. Is there a minimum of property tax that could be
levied? Mm-hmm. Like, could you do a 1% property tax?
Mm-hmm. Or even smaller, yeah.
I don't think there's necessarily a minimum, but if you're looking at bonding based on that property tax, then generally lenders want you to have a certain over 100% coverage on the amount of debt that you're taking on. So I'm happy to put those numbers together. If you did a 1% property tax and that was enough to give you the proper coverage on the debt that you wanted to take out, I don't think the state says that there's a minimum amount that you have to levy.
Okay.
My guess is, though, 1% probably wouldn't get you a bond payment, but I'm happy to dig deeper into that and bring some numbers back.
That'd be great.
And is the county sort of maxed at what they charge for property tax?
That I don't know.
No. I mean, they could raise, definitely not. Like, they could absolutely raise their property taxes. There's not necessarily, that I'm aware of, a statutory limit. It's purely a political question.
And I think it's driven by your fund balance as well. So when the county has a similar situation, if their fund balance was consistently exceeding that threshold that we've talked about every year, then the state would take a look at their property tax rates and say, if you're routinely collecting more than you need for operations and capital needs, then your assessment's too high. I don't think that's ever been the case.
Right, and if they decided they wanted to spend $100 million on road improvements, they could raise property taxes unilaterally to fund that.
I don't know if it's too early with that initial information, but is it possible to get some information on how, if and when we looked into one that impacts, because doesn't that impact then the amount that the county can charge or not? This is what always confuses me. If we instigate a rate, if it's going to impact them. Okay.
It would just be an additional increment above and beyond what they levy. Worth remembering too with property tax, the interesting part about it is that unless a body acts to adjust the property tax rate. Typically what happens with new growth happening in an area is the rate goes down and people actually pay a little bit less each year, depending on a lot of factors. But if your property value didn't change and there was a bunch of growth in the area, that property tax that, let's say it's $2 million that the county gets in property tax, that gets spread out over all of those entities. So in theory, the individual property owner ends up paying a little bit less.
Does that ever happen?
It does, but what happens is then the assessor comes in and values your property more, so it depends on who you are and what your property is, and if they're actually accurately assessing for new growth, because that does take, proactively going out and being like, oh, new hotel there worth $10 million, that's new growth, add it into the mix,
They have a seminar on that at ULCP. That was one of the better seminars I went to where they explained it very nicely.
Bless you.
Go to that again over there.
All right, well, it's 1:21, so I think that we should probably call it quits, because I bet we could talk about this for a while, but it might be worth it after budget season to take a serious look at property tax, and maybe between now and then get some analysis going.
Can I make a couple of announcements about tonight very quickly?
Sure.
One is, it's about tonight, and Tracy sent me a note that he's got a family issue and has to go to Salt Lake. As he was driving over here, he ended up diverting north. So he will not be with us, but I'm prepared to facilitate the conversation about the RFP, and if we need to bring it back for another round with you all with him, we can, but just know that he won't be here for that.
Thanks for the update. All right, so is there a motion to recess?
So moved.
Thanks, Kalen.
A second.
Thanks, Karen. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, recess.